Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at some simple tools that I made myself. These are tools that you can make to help make life easier, repairing chainsaws, string trimmers, and such. And sometimes you want to just drive the tool, and here I took an old piece of drive shaft from a broken trimmer and just put a handle on it. And now I can turn the attachment and make sure that, the gearbox is good or everything's working the way it's supposed to be. It's pretty simple, but it's handy. If you don't have that, you got to find something to jam in there that's going to fit, and it's a pain in the butt. Now, there's other times when you want to actually drive that piece of equipment at some better speed. So this piece is the actual adapter from a Husqvarna trimmer that was headed for the dumpster, and I cut the end off, so I got part of a drive shaft, tube, and coupler. And I can do the same thing with it. I can turn it by hand and make sure everything works, or I can hook a drill up to it just like that and turn it a little faster and make sure everything's working the way it should be at speed. So that's proven to be pretty handy. Sometimes a person will walk in the door and claim that their attachment is bad. Most of the times they don't have it attached all the way. But other times we can prove that the attachment is good and the problem's up in the clutch end of the power equipment. So let's take another look. Here's another example of an attachment. And, it goes on there just like the factory attachment would go on a trimmer. And this time we're going to drive a power pruner. This just makes life a lot easier inside the shop too. It's winter time and the doors are down. You're not running a piece of equipment in the shop. So there you go. Attachment, driver, thingamajobber. The next thing we're going to look at, you've seen on this channel before. It's a fuel hose remover. And I just jammed a Craftsman handle on the same drive shaft I used in the last tool. I ground a funny end on it with a ramp and a little curve in there. You could do the same thing with probably a flat blade screwdriver. Just grind a curve in it. And it allows you to get, onto a hose barb and pry a hose off. Here's a little closer example of what I'm doing. There are factory tools like this. You don't need to spend money on a factory tool. This is pretty simple. Here's another example of it in use. You can see that there's kind of a ramp on the bottom side of it too, so you can use it like a fulcrum to pry hoses off of barbs. Works pretty good. Alright, now we're going to look at a fuel hose clamp. Now a lot of times I can just jam a stopper or a golf tee into the end of a fuel line, but sometimes you want to pinch it off. But pinching it off could damage the hose depending on what you're using to pinch it with. So it looks like I put 15 pounds of pressure on there and it held, but look what I did to the line. There's little, and they're not really cuts, but there's little micro grooves in there from the tool. So I've added heat shrink tubing to one of these pliers to cover up all the the sharp edges on it, and that seemed to have made a difference as far as how it looks after I've used it as a clamp. Now sometimes the fuel hose just doesn't want to push over the end of a fitting on a carburetor. You can only get it on there so far. Well, what I've done is I've taken a snap ring pliers and ground a point on the end of it. I use the snap ring pliers because when I squeeze it, the jaw is open, unlike a needle nose pliers, or when you squeeze it, the jaw is closed. And because I ground a point on it, I can jam it in the end of a hose and then kind of relax the end of the hose, massage it, if you will, soften it up enough to push it on to a fitting. And you can get, carried away with this and wreck the hose, I suppose. Here I'm going to get a little extreme. But this simple tool allows you to push fuel line on a bigger fitting than it should be on, or even the right size fitting, which just goes on easier. Here I'm able to push it way on around the bend. So that's proven pretty handy as well. Alright, now we're going to look at a problem that's a Husqvarna problem. It's resetting the brake band on some chainsaws. So this is a tool that Husky provides with some of their saws without the handle. So you can see it's only, 6 inches long, but because I put a handle on it now it's, maybe 10 inches long. And we use this tool to reset the chain brakes. That brake band has to be opened up like this before it'll push over a clutch drum, which turns out to be a problem a lot of people have. They don't reset the brake, or they don't take off the brake. They pry the cover off the clutch drum, and then there's no way they're getting it back on there without resetting that brake band. Some people don't know that they have to reset the brake band. Others just bolt it on there that way and hope for the best, and end up wrecking a bunch of stuff. But you can easily grind a regular scrunch into the shape you need to make that tool. So for some 5 series saws, they use a different style of actuator for the brake band. And because we're a shop, we have stuff like this laying around. I'm using a crankcase and the brake handle. There's no clutch drum on here, so I can just push it right on there flush and make it happen. Works pretty good. Alright, now we're going to look at some different clutch tools. That's a factory spade type clutch tool from Husqvarna. Here's one that's got a hole through the center of it. There's only a few pieces of equipment that need that one. So these are factory clutch tools. But the point is, you can make, like here's an old Pittsburgh socket that I ground to use as a clutch tool. Here's some more factory ones. Just a lot of different styles, but sometimes you run across something that's uncommon. This one I made for some old saw. I don't even remember what it was. And they look kind of rough, like this one here. You can see I took a bolt and cut it off and then just welded a couple other smaller bolts along the side of it. They look rough because, you use them once in a hurry to get a job done, and then you throw them in the drawer, So now another big job we do working on chainsaws is pressure testing the crankcases and vacuum testing them. You have to block off the intake and the exhaust. And these tools here are used for blocking off the intake. A lot of them are factory tools, but some of them are things that I've made. That's factory, that's factory, that's for a 372, that's factory. Usually you have a metal plate, a rubber gasket, and I keep the associated screws with most of them. There's a steel block-off plate. But here's just a carburetor that I filled with silicone sealant. So I can just bolt that carburetor on there. Here's another one. Instead of trying to come up with a special plate to do that, we just bolt the carb on. Here's one with a rubber stopper jammed in it. This one here is from a power cutter, like a K960 or something. No, I take that back. K770, I think. But I also keep the screws with it. You know, I just use a piece of fuel hose to keep the screws on there. So on the other end of the engine, you have the exhaust, and you need block off plates for that as well. So a lot of these are factory plates. That one's not. That one's not. That one is. You can tell the ones that look like they were roughly cut out and quickly drilled just to work are the ones that I made. They don't have to be pretty to work though. But a lot of times when I first made them, I was in a hurry. I needed some way to block it off and I didn't have the right tool at the time. These wedges, these rubber wedges are used. You can sandwich it between the cylinder and a muffler. I don't know what that one's for. Can't even imagine what that one's for. But to make some of these custom plates, all you really need is, you know, a chunk of aluminum or steel and some rubber. Maybe a roll of rubber or something. I think I got some right here. What do we got? There's a kit for $540, I believe. That I did not make. That's a factory kit. And you can see by the shape of some of those pieces that sometimes you got to buy the factory kit to get it done decent. So here we go. I got a roll of wire, or excuse me, rubber. Here's a wider roll. I just keep that in the drawer with the rest of the pieces in case I got to make something. There's a little scrap of metal. So this is a specialty tool used on power cutters or concrete saws. The bearing at the head of the saw where the blade bolts on has got a retaining ring that holds it in place. And that tool is used for removing that ring. You can see that that ring has got a series of notches in it that this tool lines up with. Well, those rings or nuts, whatever you want to call it, they're always tight. So I just cut up one of those tools and welded it to a plate and put a nut on it so I can use an impact to remove it. This one's a spring tool. Now, if you ever tried to put this brake spring on here, it can be a pain in the butt. Sometimes you can use a flat tip screwdriver and roll it on there, but I used the same piece of stainless drive shaft rod I used in some of the earlier tools and cut a funny end on it and jammed a snap-on handle on the end of it. So the way this tube is cut, I can easily drop it through the hook of the spring. We'll get a close-up shot here. If I drop it through the hook of the spring and then push it over the end of the stud that the spring's supposed to hook to, it really works slick. I'm sure there's a factory tool like this. There you go. Spring's pushed on there and it didn't go flying across the shop. So I hope you enjoyed that edition of Homemade Shop Tools. I think I'll come out every so often and put out another version of this video. If you've got any good shop tool ideas, something you use all the time, let me know what it is down in the comments. So that's all I'm going to have for you on Homemade Shop Tools. Thanks for watching. Later.